Hi, everyone, and welcome to our second LinkedIn Live. We're going to be talking about salary negotiation and nursing today, which I know is a really hot topic, and I'm glad that everyone is here to join us today. So just to quickly introduce myself, my name is Sara Fung. I'm a registered nurse, and I've been in nursing for 15 years now. I spent the first half of my career at the bedside, so working in labor and delivery, maternal child care, level 3 NICU, and then I moved into nursing leadership for a few years, where I worked as a clinical nurse specialist, professional practice specialist, and educator. And for the past few years, I've been a healthcare advocate, so advocating for issues that affect nurses, anything and everything related to careers. I am a resume writer and career coach. And I have Adam here today co-hosting with me, and I'll let him quickly introduce himself.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Adam. I have been in recruitment for over 7 years and in healthcare for 3 years. So supporting community home healthcare as well as hospital healthcare.
Awesome. So glad that you could help me with this today. And the reason that I wanted to have this webinar is I polled a lot of nurses and wanted to find out what they wanted to talk about. And salary negotiation actually came up as one of the hot topics. And I think this is a really important conversation because as a woman-dominated profession, as nurses, as in my case, a person of color, as parents, we often feel like salary negotiation is this area that we don't know anything about. We feel like we don't deserve more. We shouldn't ask for more. We don't want to trouble anyone for asking for more. And it's just one of those things that I definitely didn't learn about in nursing school, never learned about on the job. And it wasn't until a few years ago when I actually worked with a career coach myself that she said, hey, you should ask for more money. You should negotiate your salary at your for your next job offer. And that really turned the light on for me and made me realize actually that I do have a lot to offer, as many of you do. And it's something that is really common in other industries, and we need to kind of get on the bandwagon here. And so that's why I wanted to have this webinar today, and also to share with you that I've personally negotiated my salary several times, and it is possible, and there are definitely things that you can do about that. So as we're going through the webinar, I just wanted you guys to feel free, if you're listening in today, to type into the chat any questions that you have, or if you feel comfortable to share any experiences that you've had with salary negotiation. We'll get to your questions at the end of our chat today. So maybe, Adam, we can start at the top and just talk about from the time a job is posted, from your perspective, from an organization's perspective. Does the employer usually have a salary range in mind?
So most employers, they do have a pay band in mind. If this is a unionized position, obviously you guys know where the union pay bands kind of lay. But for most of our organizations, there are a pay band already set up and already established. So the recruiters will know typically what the salary expectations will be. Just very few organizations actually do post it, just due to their internal policies and upon the privacy on their internal equity.
Okay, that's good to know because I know it's kind of a pain point for a lot of nurses. You know, why is the salary range not posted? And that kind of explains it. Would you say that salary ranges are posted for the majority of job postings or not?
Not at all. A lot of the organizations are very much focused on keeping that private until they reach a certain stage. I've seen a few organizations that do post on Indeed, but it's very, very few and far between, or it's just an obnoxious amount of range, like $30,000 to $100,000. That doesn't tell you if it's commissioned or if it's a part of your regular salary or if there's benefits included with that. So most of the time, organizations, they do save that for when you're on the phone screen or a little bit further along in the process.
Okay, so that kind of touches upon my next question. When do you think is an appropriate time to start asking about things like salary, benefits, and pay?
So it's really important, especially with some organizations, they have 4 interview rounds with homework take homes and everything like that. And you want to make sure that not only the job is aligning with what your needs are, but also the financial expectations are. So it's not a unreasonable thing to talk about salary in your first phone screen with the recruiter. It's also really important that it's not one of your very first points when you're on the phone screen with a recruiter, because that's a bit of a off-putting topic when you're just like, "Hey, my name is Sarah, and I'm calling from XYZ," and then I'm like, "Okay, Sarah, well, I'm really interested in this position, but what is the salary for this?" Right? So really make sure that you get to know what the job entails, and then from there, you have a general idea of what your expected compensation would be at that point. And then it's really important that when you're applying, that you do go into that job knowing what your kind of bottom line is, and then obviously what your ideal salary and your target is.
Okay, so it sounds like to me that in order to even know what the salary is, you need to know what the responsibilities of the job are, because that would make more sense in terms of what the reasonable salary would be. Because if you just straight out ask what's the salary without understanding what the job is, then it kind of, you're not getting all the information just yet.
That's exactly it. And even on some of my phone screens that I conduct, I've had someone who are considering for leadership opportunities be like, "Hey, what is the day to day generally looking like?" And then talking to the candidates, some of my candidates have been like, "Okay, with that, I'd be looking for 130K, 120K, right?" So it kind of gives people a good idea what is expected of them. So then that way they know what to expect of the organization.
Okay, because I've definitely been guilty of what you just said. So, as part of my role, I help nurses with their resumes, with job searching and career coaching. And I have definitely looked at job postings and straight up messaged the recruiter and said, "Hey, what's the salary?" And they did tell me, but I can see now when you're talking why that might be an off putting point, because you're not even asking about other aspects of the role. You just kind of want to know the salary straight off the bat.
And that's exactly it. And there's a different way where you are able to ask the salary expectations, right? And then you could be like, "Oh, I am interested in this position. If I were to be making a move, I would be looking for something in this capacity at this type of a salary." So there's different ways where you can ask about those salaries, just in a little bit of a different way.
Mm-hmm. And so I think the big question with this webinar in particular is just talking about salary negotiation and what exactly that is. Because in particular, for anyone who's never negotiated their salary before, maybe they have no idea even what some steps or what the process could look like. So could you break down maybe a common example of how someone could negotiate their salary?
Yeah, so we'll start off with the unionized positions, just because that's the majority of the roles that I do focus on. For that, there's really not a lot of upfront negotiation. What you're going to be getting is you're going to be getting your offer letter, whatever your union is representing you. Say, for example, it's ONA. ONA and your registered nurse would be 3424, and that's all that we can offer at that point. A lot of the times nurses want to know before they resign, especially in a full-time position or even a part-time position, they want to make sure that they're not losing that equity that they've built up. So what is going to be included in your offer letter is going to be a what's called an experience form. So on top of your letters of employment and all that kind of fun stuff, you want to fill out as much information as possible for HR to essentially, sorry, I went on mute there, so that they get as much information as they can, and then they can review, and then they can approve your new salary. So a lot of the times, nurses have a misconception that they're going to lose, say, if they're at $42 an hour, they're going to lose that amount of money by starting off fresh, which is not the case. So unionized, that's the overall process. And for whatever reason, if the organization is super slow at approving your salary, they most of the time backdate your salary. So they backdate it, whatever amount of hours that you've worked, it'll be taking effect your next pay period. So that's how the unionized roles work. Typically, for the non-unionized roles, what you would be wanting to do is go in with a number that you're really ideally looking for, right? Sometimes it may not be attainable depending on the size of the organization, the job itself and its scope. But always make sure that you are having a number in mind instead of just kind of blindly negotiating. It's really important that, if they say, "Hey, Sarah, the interview went really well, and we'd like to go ahead and make you an offer of XYZ starting on this date. You get these benefits, you get this allowance. What do you think?" And then just because you're getting that offer does not mean that you need to accept the offer right then and there on the spot. you don't want to kind of drag the organization along for days at a time, especially on a verbal offer, because most of the time there are going to be multiple candidates for that position. So if somebody doesn't hear, it's like, okay, we're going to move on to the next person. So make sure that you are notifying the organization in a timely manner. But if the salary that you get is not necessarily what you're wanting, whenever you're negotiating, always ask for 15% more of what your current salary is. And then there will be a back and forth depending on what the organization's pay bands are. There may need to be approvals taken up to finance through HR. So there could be a bit of a delay in that case, especially if you're looking at getting to the top of their band. So there's going to be those types of approval cases as it comes along. But that's generally the overall process. And then make sure that you're not just taking the salary just for taking the salary, right? Obviously, you're not going to want to push. So if you get an increase in your salary and you're just like, hey, let me see if I could push any more. Once you get the increase in the initial offer, that's typically where the organizations are landing or wanting to make you that offer. So don't kind of push too much at that point. But that's why I always recommend negotiating 15% of what you currently are, because even if you're not making that much more in your salary, a lot of people they don't know that the title of the job has its own internal equity. So if you're a clinical educator lead coming from bedside, that's going to be your kind of jumping step to your leadership position. So having that kind of title is also equity, but people just don't kind of really look at it in the immediate form.
Yeah, those are all really great points. So all you nurses listening, do you hear that? 15%. Ask for 15% more. That's 1 5. And in addition to all of the points you made, Adam, which are all really valid, just going back to the union positions, as you mentioned, Adam, there is very little to no negotiation for pay. However, in my experience, you can negotiate things like your start date a little bit. If you're transferring internally from one unit to another in the same organization and you've already had time off which was approved, that should transfer over as well. So I've been able to do that. So there is a little bit of leeway. Instead of starting, let's say, next week, maybe you could negotiate to start the week after if there are things that you need to tie up or if there is any flexibility, but it's just about having that conversation. And then for the non-union positions, I personally have negotiated up to 20% higher. It was for a job that I didn't end up taking, but it started to make me realize that, yes, there is power in negotiation. There is also power in negotiating for things other than pay. So if, let's say, the pay can only go up so much, maybe there could be a signing bonus, maybe there could be an increase in your benefits, there could be waiving of the waiting period for your benefits, or there could be extra educational opportunities. And I think, Adam, you mentioned as well a scrub allowance. So there are many things that you can negotiate in addition to your pay. And I think this is something that as nurses, we're all still learning as we go. So there's definitely a lot of potential here. And I just wanted everyone to know that as well.
And also there's so when you're in your interview process, say for example, you are interviewing for a bedside nursing role and your intent is to move on to a leadership position, you can also ask the recruiter or the hiring manager, well, we call them hiring managers, but your unit manager, what the chances are at internal growth, right? Because especially with the market right now, hospitals are looking to keep and community agencies are looking to keep their staff. What are some internal growth opportunities within the organization that you're wanting to do? Like my current organization is really great at developing their own internal staffing. So we've had situations where we had very much internal interest in a clinical service manager role. One of our internals did not get the position, unfortunately, but she was given other opportunities within the organization to, in fact, get some more leadership experience. So even if, and this is just kind of a side note from the salary negotiation piece, but starting to negotiate your title, I guess you could kind of say as well is start to apply for those internal positions. Even if you feel like you may not be necessarily qualified right now, there's no harm in applying for those positions that you are interested in. Most of the time you'll get filter through the ATS, and then you may not get contacted. But then this way, you could go to your manager and be like, "Hey, I applied for this charge nurse position, or I applied for this position," and even that is still working towards your equity in the long run by just
Mhm.
gaining that experience and getting those opportunities.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's important too. Although, just to play devil's advocate, I think if there's an organization that is only changing your job title and they're increasing your responsibilities, that should be reflected somewhat in your pay, even if it's a small amount. I think, for example, if you move from a director position to, or let's say you move from a manager to a director position, I do think that should warrant somewhat of an increase in the salary as well. But you touched upon an important point, Adam, which is that a lot of women, a lot of nurses feel that they should only apply for a job if they're 100% qualified. And what I've read in the research is if you're about 70% qualified, you should apply for it, because when someone puts a job posting together, they're looking for like a unicorn, right? This is the absolute perfect candidate, but even if you have the majority of the qualifications, it would still be worth applying for.
That's right. And when you're, and Sarah can attest to this as well, if you have the correct amount or the correct verbiage in your resume, most of the time hospitals are using an ATS system. So if you're applying for, say, a clinical service manager role, as long as you're having those terminologies in your resume and you've actually had that experience, you'll go on a ranking scale. So if you've kind of hit every nail on the head, you'll be at 100%, and then you'll be contacted pretty much right away. So it's really important that you do have your resume updated for when you do feel like you're ready to make a switch um, on a higher level, right? It's just really important that you do have that resume updated for when you do decide that you are wanting to make that move internally.
Hmm. And then I know that we talked about other things, like other advice you might have just in general with regard to salary negotiation, Adam.
Yeah, so it's just really important to kind of build that relationship with your recruiter, just because contrary to popular opinions, recruiters are on your side for the most part. So when you're having that salary topic conversation, make sure that you're brutally honest with the recruiter. Because we've had situations, well, not speaking for West Park in general, but I've had situations where people are like, oh, yes, yes, I'm comfortable with this salary. Then when it gets to the offer letter, um, the salary wasn't what the candidate was expecting. And then certain organizations, they can't go above that certain salary. So not only you've wasted that time as yourself as a job seeker, but your hiring managers, you've gone through the process, sometimes 2, 3, 4 interviews to get to that stage. And then knowing that that's not a salary that you're looking to maintain, it's just kind of like a waste of time for yourself, right? Or if your salary expectations are too high for that current role, there could be a position that's upcoming in the near future, especially when organizations are looking to grow in a wide range of not only clinical but other sides of the hospital. It's just really important that you do have that conversation and that honest conversation, because I know sometimes um, nurses specifically, they're wanting to kind of make that switch from bedside, right? Really make sure that when you are making that switch from bedside, that you're going to be truly happy in your next role. So it's really important that you do kind of identify even before you start to apply, hey, what do I really want to do? Do you want to do the clinical side for maybe an educator role or a clinical practice lead, or are you wanting to be on the managerial side and the operational side of things? So that will really also help determine what salary expectations you'll be looking for going into it, because each one of those streams has their differences in their salary expectations as well.
Yeah, I think that's all really good to know. I think also just talking in general with salary negotiation, you're doing this because you want to increase your future earning potential. So let's say you have a conversation and you're able to negotiate even a few $1,000s more in salary, that would be your new base salary. So any further increases you have are based on your original salary. And something that I learned recently is that sometimes jobs are based on the salary of the person who held the position before. And so by you negotiating a higher salary, you're actually increasing the salary for people that are going to be in your position in the future, if this is not a job you're going to hold forever. So I think this is all really kind of coming to a head where the bottom line really is that you can and should negotiate your salary. It's a common myth that if you negotiate your salary, that the offer is going to be taken away from you, which Adam, you confirmed is not the case. I think it's just something we need to start getting more comfortable with as nurses.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And the worst that they could say is no. And one, you've still got your offer in hand, and you could choose to accept or decline that offer. And then two, just don't forget about that equity in that job title too.
Yeah, and I think that when you're doing salary negotiation, as you mentioned, you should have a number in mind, right? So if you have no idea what comparable salaries are, that's something that you should look into before you get to that stage. So whether it be looking around online, when you go onto LinkedIn, if you sign up for LinkedIn Premium, I believe it gives you more salary insights so that you have an idea of what a reasonable salary increase would be based on your research and based on your own skills and qualifications. I think these are all just things that we need to start getting used to, and just having that conversation, talking to other nurses who have done salary negotiation about what their experience has been, and kind of learning from each other too. So I know that I'm just having a quick look at the chat. It looks like there have been some issues with our presentation, just starting over from the beginning. If anyone can hear us now, if there are any questions, feel free to type them into the chat and we'd be happy to answer them.
And then just a note for the LinkedIn presentations. Unfortunately, LinkedIn does automatically mute it. I just noticed it myself, but the recorded version will have audio and you can view that at any point.
Okay. So let's see, are there any questions from the audience? I'm not sure if our presentation got muted or what's happened. What I'll do is I'm going to take one of the questions and I'll just pop it in here. It wasn't actually a question, it was more of a comment. So one person was saying that she found the 15 to 20% hard to believe. That's asking for more than $100,000. So I can confirm from personal experience that was the case for me. I applied for a position which was similar to the position I'd held before. And what I actually did was I was honest with them and I told them, this is what I was making before. I'm hoping to make the same at this organization. And I suppose what they did, Adam, was they went to their finance department to get that approval. And they did come back to me in writing to say that they could meet my previous salary. But I know that's not everyone's experience. And this was also before the pandemic. So I don't know financially if things have changed within organizations, but I can confirm that was my experience previously. Let's see here. Okay, so there's another question here. How do you start the negotiation topic? Do you want to take this one, Adam?
Yeah, so it's usually once you just find out what the salary is. And typically that's when you start to have those phone screens and looking to be booked in for that interview. You can ask your panel members what the salary is, and then whoever your main point of contact would be, whether it be HR or be a recruiter, you could start to have those more a little bit in-depth conversations. But what I personally like to do is I have it all in my, we call it a screener document. I always like to ask that question right up front. So then that way, when I say, hey, so-and-so Mildred should be considered for this position, she's looking for this salary. Typically, the unit managers will know what the salary that they can offer is. If they say, hey, this is completely off of my scale, then, then that's kind of where things land. Or if they're just like, oh, it's close, but, I might be able to work this out, then that's something that we would do also. So as early in the process as you can, but don't be afraid to even ask your panel that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess what we're both saying is ask early so that you don't feel like you're wasting their time, the organization isn't wasting their time, and the recruiter isn't wasting their time. Just being upfront with this, I think, is a really good strategy. Okay, so we have another question here. I had a colleague who asked for her organization's salary grid. Is that a common question? It was for a non-union role.
Yeah, it's fairly common, just because people, when they are making a move, they want to see what the top end is. So if they're being offered very close to the top end, they know that they're not going to be able to move very much in the future state for the salary compensation. Organizations are actively reviewing their salary bands with the talent demand in the marketplace right now. So everything is being monitored and evaluated pretty much either quarterly or yearly. Yearly is typically the amount of time, or even feedback from the candidates that the recruiter or HR is receiving. If we've had 10 phone screens, haven't been able to find anybody, but we could find people if there's, you know, if the position was like 85 and people are looking for 100K, then that's when we could start to kind of really evaluate depending on the specific need for how quickly we need to get that person in the door. So it just kind of varies from time to time, but most of the time, organizations will not disclose their salary band just due to confidentiality and internal equity. So most of the time, it won't get disclosed, but a range would get disclosed.
Okay, definitely good information. Um, so I'm just going to put another question in, and Jessica wants to know how negotiable are non-salary benefits and compensation in a union?
So that's pretty tough. I've only been able to successfully negotiate one salary and sorry, one benefits piece on that, and that was when I had my community job. So it's very kind of uncommon when it does come to unionized roles. It can be done, but it's very seldomly done. Just because with unionizations, there's very strict rules on that one. So we just don't want to kind of follow any sort of grievances or anything like that. So unionized roles for non-salary benefits are a little bit tougher to come by. It might be a little bit on the easier side when it comes to like maybe kilometers or a uniformed allowance, expenses that could be written off, those kind of things. But when it comes to benefits and compensation and non-unionized, it is a little bit tough. But the compensation, you just submit your years of experience form or the evaluation form, and that's how your salary would get negotiated. I've had some
Mhm.
people who didn't think that they can submit their international experience, and then they just got their license here in Canada. So I was just like, get as much information from your international hospital as you can, write that down in the form, and see what HR comes back with. And she was able to get probably like level 3 or level 4, not the top end, but she was able to negotiate. So that's another tool that you could use if you are an internationally trained nurse.
That's great because there's been a lot of conversations lately about internationally educated nurses and them being expedited to get up and running a little bit faster. So that's always a good thing to do is mention your previous education because it won't hurt, right? In this person's case, it did result in a salary increase, and I think we're just getting our heads wrapped around the fact that we are at a critical time in nursing and we need to be creative with getting the talent in as much as possible. Are you okay with one more question, Adam? I know I'm kind of firing them at you.
Yeah, that's a-okay.
Okay. So, is there a standard number of items to negotiate, or should these be negotiated one by one? I think this person's just asking, should you try and get everything all at once, or should you try one thing at a time and see if that gets approved or not?
It's a lot easier one thing at a time. Going back and forth with finance can take a little while, especially whatever other projects are going on within whatever organization you're negotiating with. Now, there's different ways to approach this, not necessarily so much as a direct form of, I want salary, this, that, that. Oh, and by the way, I have a vacation in June, and you're starting in November, right? So there's a certain way and there's a certain um, approach that you could take that with your whoever your main contact is. So it's just like, hey, at my current job, this is what I'm making here. And then also outline why you're interested in the position that you're applying for, right? This is ideally what I would like to receive, but here's what I'm flexible on. So you can kind of put it that way, and not necessarily these are my demands and that's too bad. Because sometimes if you put it that way, it'll just be an outright no. So it's just really important that you kind of think about the way that your approach is towards that and just kind of go from there and just try. So make sure that these you list your must haves and then your nice to haves your must-haves first, your nice-to-have second, and then see what they come back with.
That's kind of what I was thinking too. You should ask for what you want the most first, which is probably the salary. And then maybe if that goes well, then you can say, hey, is there any way you could increase the benefits? Or would it be possible that there's a certain course or certification I want to take? Would you be able to cover it because it's related to the role that I'm going to? So kind of just taking it one step at a time. Okay, so I think that's the end of the questions. I'm going to wait a little longer to see if anyone else has any question, even if it's not totally related to salary negotiation. If you have questions about interviewing, resumes, cover letters, even LinkedIn, Adam and I can talk about all of those topics. We're probably going to save some of those for another day, but if you have any questions even about finding a recruiter to work with, what it's like working with a recruiter, that's probably going to be the topic for our next month's talk. And we'd encourage you to reach out to us and ask questions. If you want to get a hold of me, you can add me on LinkedIn, or you can go to my website, which is thernresume.com, all one word. You can also email me at thernresume@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, where else? Facebook. And then Adam, if you want to share with everyone where people can reach you, that'd be great.
Yeah, you could just find me on LinkedIn. I'll actually pop it in the event chat, so then if anybody joins later, you guys can have my information.
Awesome. So this was a great start to this conversation. I think, of course, there's much more to it, but we just wanted to get through the basics with you guys today. And the bottom line is, if you don't ask, you're not going to get it. So at least ask for it. Know that when you negotiate your salary, it's not going to result in a job offer being taken away. I've heard people talking about it. I've not heard of it myself. I don't think you have either, Adam, where just because you negotiate your salary that, the job offer is going to be taken away. That's not how it works. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. And if you're watching live right now, we are recording this. We'll make it available to rewatch later. It'll also be posted on my YouTube channel.